Mo here.
It is the 18th of November, 1993. Kurt Cobain walks out onto the stage decorated with stargazer lilies, black candles, and a crystal chandelier. A funeral. At his request. Kurt looks miserable. He is suffering from heroin withdrawal and, in between vomiting blood and bile, his demeanor is somber, a far cry from his usual jokey self. No one on stage is aware that what is about to come is Kurt Cobain's final recorded performance before his suicide less than 5 months later. The performance is going to be a disaster. The band is not used to playing acoustic and barely rehearsed to prepare for the change. The few rehearsals they did sounded terrible, and there were even talks of cutting Nirvana drummer Dave Grohl from the performance entirely. Up until the final moments of the dress rehearsal, the band wasn't sure if the show would even end up happening, as Kurt's withdrawal was worsening. He refused to show up to any rehearsals and, without heroin or a suitable replacement, he wouldn't be able to get through the performance at all. But then, something interesting happened. Nirvana decides to go through with it despite the setbacks. And the audiences are greeted with something unlike anything in MTV Unplugged history.
I guarantee you I will screw this song up. So.
The concept of MTV Unplugged is pretty simple. Famous musicians perform a concert entirely acoustically, and the show is taped for MTV audiences. In typical Nirvana fashion though, the band wanted to do something different. While all of the previous MTV Unplugged guests go through their biggest hits without electronic instruments, the repertoire of Kurt Cobain's final show does not follow that formula. Nirvana adapted their roster for the night to best suit the change to acoustic. Despite MTV's strong pushback, they didn't just want to play Smells Like Teen Spirit acoustically. They chose music that would benefit from the change in instruments, and they adapted the tracks to work with said change. They brought in 2 guests to assist them, the 2 members of the Meat Puppets, Chris and Kurt Kirkwood. This again displeased MTV. MTV Unplugged was a famous show at this point, and they were used to having celebrity guests accompanying the main act. And with Nirvana at the height of their popularity, they wanted an equally recognizable guest act. But alas, no amount of persuading could change Nirvana's mind, and the Meat Puppets accompanied them in the final performance. The show started despite MTV's wishes, and audiences would quickly notice the songs Nirvana were playing were ones they had heard before, but not coming out of Kurt Cobain's mouth. Of the 14 songs performed that night, a whole 6 were covers. It included songs from the Vaselines, David Bowie, the Meat Puppets, and the one I want to talk about today.
The longest train I ever saw was on that Choctaw line.
Nirvana's final song, which would end up as Kurt Cobain's last release ever, was Where Did You Sleep Last Night? While the song got more recent popularity precisely because of their performance of it, it is far from an original. Where Did You Sleep Last Night is a cover of an American folk song whose origins have been lost to time. Over 200 different versions exist, with the oldest dating all the way back to the 1870s. The earliest versions of the song go by The Longest Train and are, in their form, a murder ballad. Murder ballads started off with a practical purpose. Before modern technology enabled news to be shared easily worldwide, street performers would capitalize on the desire of passerbys to stay informed by singing about horrific events in the area for money. The tragedy of the murders and unfortunate deaths were lessened when they were backed by a familiar tune. And the more gruesome the crime, the more attention it got from passerbys, resulting in the songs focusing on especially gory tales. It's an art form that goes all the way back to the Shakespearean era, and when the British started pouring into the newly discovered North America, they took their tradition with them, continuing to make murder ballads centered around their life in the New World. The Longest Train tells the story of a woman's demise after a collision with a train. Its early versions are very different from the song sang by Kurt, but some of the lyrics remain. Even the earliest versions contain the lyric,
"Her head was found in the driver's seat. Her poor body hain't been found,"
which would later be adapted into Kurt's version. The primary purpose of the original song is not to express oneself, it was to inform while entertaining. So much of the original song, if separated from the backing track and the song structure, would read like a news report about the woman's death. To fit traditional song structure, emotive lyrics are added, such as calling the woman
"the prettiest girl I ever saw."
and describing the singer's reaction to the aftermath.
"I walked the track whole day long, hung down my head and cried."
But these are not the reason for the song's existence. They are only there to make the central news story conveyed more palatable to audiences. The point was not that the author was saddened by the woman's death. It was that a young woman was decapitated and crushed by a moving train.
In the pines where the sun never shines, and I shivered when the cold wind blows.
Sometime after its initial conception, the song was merged with In the Pines, another popular folk song. As murder ballads moved away from their original purpose of practicality, they became an art form in and of themselves. No longer were they a news report, as their focus now lied on the way the tragedy affected those close to the dead and dying. The merge with In the Pines gave the story a poetic and significantly more memorable setting. The song no longer took place by an old mine, it took place
I stayed in the pines where the sun never shines. I shivered when the cold wind blows.
An artistic effort is now made with the lyrics, using the cold and depressing setting to describe the singer's response to the tragedy, rather than to place it for historic purposes. But, other than the scenic location, In the Pines features another important addition to the story, the titular line of Kurt Cobain's swan song.
Now darling, don't tell me no lie. Where did you stay last night?
Once the two songs were combined, the song took a more grim turn. The girl is no longer a beautiful stranger the singer encounters before her demise. She is referred to as the singer's darling. While the genre of the murder ballad remains, the song takes a far more personal tone, as it follows the story of a man desperately searching for his partner, before discovering that she was beheaded in a collision with a train. The more personal approach that emerged once the two songs were fused together laid the groundwork for Kurt Cobain's version, where a third element, Kurt Cobain's personal life, is fused in, making the song all the more tragic. But, before we get to Kurt, there is one important iteration of the song we need to discuss.
Black girl, don't lie to me. Tell me where did you sleep last night?
Before Nirvana decided to cover the song, Lead Belly released his cover. In his version, a significant change to the lyrics is made. The mentions of the tragic decapitation by train from the original are almost entirely removed. In the only reference to the event, the victim is swapped, making them the husband of the titular girl rather than the girl herself. With this simple lyric change, the context of the tragedy is entirely different. The song now appears to be from the husband's perspective, and the question of "where did you sleep last night" no longer refers to the girl's disappearance following her death. Instead, it comes across as her late husband wanting to know from beyond the grave how his wife is coping with his death. The first traces of Kurt's version can be found here. While the husband is checking on his wife from beyond the grave, there is a hint of jealousy over what the wife did the night following his death. The husband is left forever married to his love, so he wishes for his wife to be doing the same. This subtext is most noticeable in the repeated line,
Shiver for me now.
begging the wife to keep her mind on him. He doesn't want her to move on. He wants her to be left suffering, forever mourning his loss. Another interesting change is that of tone. While this version is significantly less gruesome, placing much less of a focus on the brutal slaying, Leadbelly brings a darkness to the performance not present in the earlier versions. The backing track is almost as far as one could go from the cheerful banjo backing the 1926 version mentioned before. It is a slow, grueling guitar, only complemented by Leadbelly's voice, which is full of desperation. It is the voice of a living corpse, a ghost.
Fuck you all, this is the last song of the evening.
What is it?
Okay.
Kurt obviously borrows heavily from Leadbelly's version, a fact that he doesn't keep secret. Before playing his final song, Kurt makes an announcement that Leadbelly is his favorite performer ever.
Our favorite performer, isn't it? All of ours? You like him the best?
The similarities are obvious. The melody of Kurt's version is barely adapted from Leadbelly. However, performed in Nirvana's grungy style, the instrumental sounds painful. Each strum of Kurt's guitar carries a sense of irreversible tragedy. Kurt's vocals double down on the desperation in Leadbelly's performance. Each word coming out of his mouth sounds strained, Kurt struggling to keep up the performance more and more with each syllable leaving his lips. In Neil Young's words, his performance was unearthly, like a werewolf. He howls those last lyrics like they are his last breath. While his performance of the song is a virtually flawless version of a traditional folk song, that is not the sole reason I consider Where Did You Sleep Last Night to be the perfect swan song. It is the context of Kurt's choice to perform this as his final song at his final recorded performance that immortalizes it. At the time, Kurt's mental state was going downhill. He always had depressive episodes, and now, suffering from heroin withdrawal, they were getting significantly worse. The straw that broke the camel's back, however, was not the heroin, or the unwanted fame, or Kurt's doubts in his ability as a musician. Kurt was a family man. His primary goal in life was not music or drugs or fame, it was creating the family he never had growing up. He wanted first and foremost to be a loving husband and a loving father. And with Courtney Love, he might have believed he had that for a while. Even though their life was falling apart due to their drug use, it is clear how much Kurt loved his wife and daughter from any piece of home video footage archived at the time. But around this time, Kurt started having suspicions of Courtney's infidelity to him. Courtney revealed in a recent interview for Brett Morgan's Montage of Heck that this precisely was the reason for Kurt's last unsuccessful suicide attempt. After believing that Courtney had been cheating on him, Kurt attempted to take his life by overdosing. With this in mind, it is not a stretch to say that this was a factor in Cobain's final attempt, and that this doubt played in his mind as he prepared for his final performance. You can see traces of this in the preparation for the performance, which ended up being taped. Kurt asks everyone he knows to sit in the front row.
Amy, will you guys will you and Janet and everybody that I know sit in the front so I can look at you? Because I hate strangers.
However, Courtney and Frances Bean are not present, as Kurt had specifically asked Courtney not to come to the performance. This is not accidental, especially considering the lyrics of the song he chose to close off the act. The lyrics of Leadbelly's version mostly remain unchanged, but a new interpretation is applied to them when considering the context surrounding the performance. In Leadbelly's version, "Where did you sleep last night?" is a question rooted in a jealous desire to keep his wife's mind on him. With Kurt, it comes across as an accusation to Courtney Love. It's not an act of concern or begging to be remembered after one's gone, it is a direct call-out of the girl's transgressions. And while Leadbelly's version implies the husband's accidental death in the pines, Kurt's version makes it clear that it's an intentional act. He places emphasis on the line, "I'm going where the cold wind blows," before going into the desolate description of the pines. Kurt's protagonist does not die in the pines in some tragic accident. He walks into the pines as an act of suicide. The same can be seen at the end of the chorus, another point at which Kurt places focus on. The line,
I shivered when the cold wind blows,
present in all of the original versions, has been altered to
I was shivering all night through.
It is no longer a poetic description of the unpleasant aura of the pines, it is an announcement of the protagonist's upcoming suffering. Kurt isn't singing from beyond the grave like Leadbelly's protagonist. He is still alive and announcing his plan to die, and the girl's infidelity is no longer a future concern rooted in jealousy. It has already happened, and has led to the protagonist's suicide in the pines. With that as the last line of Kurt's final recorded performance, it is difficult not to imagine that Kurt foresaw his own demise. "Where did you sleep last night?" acts as Kurt's musical suicide note, outlining the final straw that broke him, and pointing his finger at the person he considered responsible. All under the guise of a folk song, dating back more than a century. The performance ends and Kurt stands up. He lets out a quiet thank you and promptly walks off stage, abandoning the cheering crowd. The crowd, as well as the MTV producers, wanted an encore. Kurt refused, saying that he sucked and the band sounded terrible. After about 5 minutes of begging, Kurt gave the real reason. "I can't top that last song." Five months later, on the 8th of April 1994, Kurt would succeed in taking his own life. The MTV Unplugged special was released, running repeatedly for a whole week following his passing. The songs were compiled in an album, MTV Unplugged in New York, which released on the 1st of November 1994, nearly a full year following Kurt's final performance. Track 14 of the album, the final song to be recorded during Kurt Cobain's thunderous career, was Where Did You Sleep Last Night? A farewell to an icon, and a perfect swan song.